When I was younger, around 12 years old, my parents booked a 4-night stay at a log cabin somewhere in California with my grandma. The events that occurred scarred me for life. I felt the crisp air on my face as I opened the car door. I looked at the woods around me and then started towards the cabin door. My mother called after me, "Ed, sweetie, why don't you go up to your room and unpack your things?" When I opened the cabin door, I was surprised at the sudden creak it made. The cabin was a large space with a sofa parked in front of a flat-screen TV. There was a kitchen attached to the living room. It had a counter that sat bar stools. I walked up the stairs and past the bathroom. Down the hall, I entered the room I was supposed to be staying in and screamed. There was a dead rat in the middle of the floor. It looked like something had been gnawing on it. Its insides had been smeared everywhere. I bolted down the stairs and saw my dad wheeling my grandma's wheelchair in the cabin. "Dad! There's a dead rat in my room!" I practically screamed. "You're old enough. Why don't you clean it up?" Eventually, I used an entire paper towel and a can of Lysol to clean it all up. It was around 6 p.m. when my mom made some mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, my favorite at the time. I was walking to the couch Grandma was next to with my bowl when I noticed something. There was a trap door in the middle of the room. How had I not noticed it before? "Mom, what's this door doing here?" I asked my mother. "Oh, it's probably a crawl space, Ed. They're used to keep floods from coming into the cabin." I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV. I vividly remember how much I liked the food. It was great. Finally, it was time for bed. My dad had told me in the car how much fishing and kayaking we were going to do. I was pretty excited. I got in my bed and fell asleep, the warm covers comforting me. Around 12 a.m., I woke to this shuffling sound. I stepped out of my room, leaving the door slightly ajar. As I peered into the dusty hall, I noticed nothing but the moonlit shadows dancing on the wall. The shuffling sound continued as I crept down the stairs leading to the living room. I placed my ear to the floor, and just as I suspected, the sounds were coming from under the floorboards. Dread washed over me as the fear of something scurrying around under there hit me. Being the idiot I was, I thought I could take whatever was down there on. So I grabbed my flashlight and decided I should go in. I opened the trap door and thousands of rats scattered as I climbed down into the cold, damp space. It was huge and reminded me disturbingly of a maze. I crawled deeper into the darkness. I can't tell if I was being really brave or really stupid. I crawled until I reached a dimly lit corner about 10 feet in front of me. Suddenly there was movement, and I shone my flashlight at whatever was there. It was this long-armed and pale figure hunched in the corner. Its eyes reflected white off my flashlight. I was completely stunned as the thing started to screech. Looking back, I noticed the flashlight probably hurt its eyes. I turned myself around and started to crawl as fast as I could. I glanced back and the thing was chasing me, wrapping its enormously long fingers around the support beams. I guess it had been feeding off of the rats, and now it wanted something different, something bigger. Me. I was lost. The thing gaining on me with every foot I moved. I thought all hope was lost until I spotted the trap door. As soon as I reached it, I pushed it open and scrambled to get out. The thing started grabbing at me, its mouth gaping. I was in a hurry, so please excuse the lack of details. I kicked it away and slammed the trap door closed. The thing was clawing and pushing at it, so I threw my body on top of the door. After a while, the thrashing stopped, and I bolted upstairs and reached my parents' bedroom. "Dad! Mom!" I shouted as I banged on the door. My dad groggily opened the door and asked what I was doing. "Dad, we gotta go! Something's trying to get in the house!" But he didn't believe me. I tried to explain it wasn't a nightmare, but it was pointless. I didn't get any more sleep that night. I was too scared to sleep. That morning, I ate my breakfast and went out on the lake with my dad. He got the fishing rod set up, and we got on the little boat. I didn't catch any fish, but I enjoyed spending time with my father. Anything to get my mind off of last night's events. Eventually, dawn turned to dusk, and we started to roast marshmallows. An activity both Grandma and Mom loved, They used to go camping when my mother was younger. The s'more I made was delicious, perfectly gooey. It was finally bedtime. I was terrified of the thought of that creature trying to attack my family. I didn't think I could sleep, but somehow eventually I managed to doze off. I awoke then, right there. I heard the unmistakable sound of the trap door creaking open. My heart dropped into my chest as a sense of dread hit me. Right then I heard the sound of cupboards in the kitchen slamming open and shut. Whatever it was looking for me. I started to hyperventilate as I heard the steps creaking. Was my door locked? Could it even open doors? Hundreds of questions went through my mind, but to no avail. I had zero answers. I heard scratching sounds coming from the hallway. The doorknob jiggled and I held my breath. Suddenly everything stopped as I heard another door opening. I heard my dad scream, "Go on! Get out of here! Get!" There was this awful, ear-splitting screech and the shatter of glass. I bolted to my door and saw my dad standing just outside of his doorway with his fishing knife. I looked to my right and saw a trail of blood leading to a shattered window. That night we packed our things and left the cabin. We never went anywhere near the woods since. Remember to keep safe as best as you can. If you hear strange noises, don't hesitate to run or call the police, because you might never know what lies near you, just beneath your feet. Hi there. I'm Mallow and I'm 23 years old. I used to live in Canada until my husband and I moved to Florida. Just recently, my brother told me this story. I'll be telling this from his point of view and from how he's telling it to me. Hi, I'm Keith, and this story happened a few years ago. Me and my boyfriend, Theo, were 20 when this happened. Me and Theo had just gotten into a big fight. We were fuming and hadn't talked to each other for a few days. Finally, my sister Mallow told me to reach out and ask him if he wanted to do something like camping or hiking. I knew Theo liked being outdoors and enjoyed spending time with me. "Oh, come on, Keith," Mallow urged. I agreed to talk to him and take him up to Niagara. I left the living room and headed upstairs. Once I made it into my room, I closed the door and made the phone call. It rang a few times before someone answered. "Keith?" "Theo, I'm sorry. I was wondering if I could try to make this better." The phone was silent for a few moments before Theo spoke again. "What were you thinking about doing?" I sighed in relief and told him about my thoughts. He agreed and said he couldn't wait. "I'll pick you up tomorrow," I said, trying to hide my excitement. "See you then," Theo said. I hung up and started packing for the trip to Niagara the next day. After a good night's sleep, I went downstairs with my hand in my sweater pockets. I went into the kitchen and peered out the window above the sink. My sister's car was missing. I ignored this and made myself some eggs and toast. When the sizzling eggs started moving, I reached for the spatula. I placed them on my flower-decorated plate and sat down at the marble table. I ate quickly and hurried out the front door. I walked out to my red Volvo and got into the driver's seat, pushing the key into the ignition. I left the driveway and headed for Theo's place. Skipping ahead a little bit, I had just made it to Theo's house. I found him sitting on the steps leading to the front door. He was looking at his phone with his headphones on. I sat there for a few moments waiting for Theo to look up, but he didn't. I honked the horn, a bit annoyed. His head shot up and he looked at me surprised. He smiled brightly and got into the front seat, throwing his bag in the back. "I missed you," he said as I started driving. "Same here," I said, glancing at him quickly. He grabbed my hand and squeezed gently. I smiled and kept my eyes fixed to the road. It was a few hours from where Theo lived to Niagara, so on the way there we passed the time by talking about what had happened the past few weeks. Skipping further ahead, we had just finished the hike and made it to a nice clearing in the forest. The sky was turning gray, and we heard distant thunder booming. Quickly we found a dry spot and threw up the tent. The rain came out of nowhere, pelting down like bullets. "Hurry, Keith!" Theo cried, throwing himself into the open tent. I slipped into the tent and zipped the door shut. Theo rolled around, giggling widely. I smiled and laid down, exhausted from the long day. Theo was one of those people who believed in the supernatural, but I always had that see it to believe it frame of mind. "Can I tell you something?" I asked. Theo sat up and looked down at me. "Of course," Theo said. "That weird deer creature you mentioned when we first got together, I think I shot it the other day." "The Wendigo?" "Yeah, that thing, the Wendigo." Theo stiffened and shook his head with a worried expression. "Don't say its name." "Why? Are you scared?" "Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo," I teased. "Shut up," Theo hissed. Little did I know saying its name only made everything worse. I got into my sleeping bag and slept next to Theo. I actually chatted with him for a little bit before I did that, but it's not important. The next morning I woke up and shivered. A cold morning dew covered the tent. I went outside to relieve myself. I walked a little ways from the tent and walked through a fog which seemed to come out of nowhere. After I was done doing my business, I zipped up my pants and walked back towards the tent, or at least in the direction I thought the tent was. I stumbled around in the fog for what seemed like hours. "Keith," Theo called. "I'm over here," I called back. "Keith." I paused for a moment, thinking about what direction his voice came from. That was the weird thing, though. His voice seemed to be coming from every direction. "Come on, Keith," Theo called. I stood there, looking around nervously. I didn't think this was Theo, but if it wasn't, what was imitating his voice so perfectly? A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered Theo telling me, "The Wendigo can mimic voices perfectly, but if you go towards it, there's a chance you might never come back." I backed away from where I thought the voice was coming from, although I was disoriented and couldn't think straight. A shiver rushed down my spine again, but this time it was due to how I'd bumped into something hard. I froze, thinking it was probably a tree or something, but this thing was breathing on my neck. Now keep in mind, I'm 6'4", so it's not every day something breathes on me. I spun around quickly and screamed. This was a deer, but it was wrong. It was standing on its back legs and showing its sharp yellow teeth in an evil smile. It slowly started walking towards me, getting on all fours and growling. I backed away and observed its features. It had long claws that dug into the ground as it walked. It had chunks missing from its body, and it smelled like rotting flesh. I ran in the opposite direction of the creature. I felt it chasing after me as I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran. Ahead of me the fog ended. This was unusual, but I was thankful because I could make out the tent's outline. I burst out of the fog and fell to the ground, breathing deeply. Theo unzipped the tent and glanced at me with a worried look. "Are you okay? We need to leave," I demanded, getting to my feet and grabbing everything outside the tent. Theo did not question me. He packed everything up and threw it into his bag. Now it was time to hike back. Theo stood by my side as we made our way back to the car. I glanced around, looking for anything out of the ordinary. My eyes skimmed past a few trees. That's when I caught a glimpse of it. But when I looked back to where it was gone. "Did you see it?" Theo asked. I nodded, still looking at the trees. He grabbed my hand and pecked my cheek. I looked at him, smoldering a little bit. I looked back into the forest. "Hey, Keith," Theo said. "Yeah?" I asked, looking back at him. His face went pale and sweat dripped down his forehead. "That wasn't me," he said, sending a chill through me. My heart started to race. "We gotta ditch the bags," I said, stopping and dropping my backpack. Theo did the same and started walking faster. We took turns glancing into the forest and looking ahead. I stepped over a few tree roots and sighed. We were about halfway done with the hike. Skipping ahead a little bit, me and Theo stopped to take a break. He was tired and sat down on a rock. I just noticed how everything had been quiet and that I couldn't even hear my footsteps. Theo stood up quickly and started walking again. He turned to look back and shrieked. I also looked back and cried out too. About 10 yards behind us was the creature from before. It was walking fairly quickly and had its tongue dragging against the ground as if it was trying to taste us. Theo and I ran as quickly as we could. "Why did you have to say its name?" Theo yelled at me. "I didn't think it was real," I said, still sprinting. A smell hit me. It came out of nowhere and was blinding my senses. It stung my eyes and made me gag. Theo screamed as he fell to the ground. I stopped abruptly and ran back to him. I helped him up as the creature neared. We dashed, but the Wendigo caught the back of my shirt. I yelped as it threw me to the ground. It crawled on top of me and pushed down on my chest. The air inside of me was forced out as it pushed down harder. I screamed in pain as I felt my ribs break under the pressure of this horrid creature. Theo smashed a stick against the Wendigo's head. It shrieked and let go of me. It turned to Theo and hissed. I stood up and grabbed Theo's hand as we both began to sprint again. I looked back and saw that it stopped chasing us. We burst out of the forest and fell to the ground, exhausted. Theo started laughing. "Suck it, Wendigo!" he screamed into the forest. He started laughing again. I cried out in pain as I tried to get up. "Keith, you're bleeding!" Theo said, rushing to my side. "You saved me," I said, looking at him. "Well, no duh, but you're bleeding," Theo said. My eyes felt heavy suddenly. "Don't close your eyes," Theo said, his voice slurring. He was screaming at me, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Tears ran down Theo's face as everything started going black. I awoke in a fully white room. A heart monitor beeped beside me. I was confused for a second before remembering the past events. Someone grabbed my hand, causing me to jump. "I was so worried," Theo said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm fine," I said, looking at the rib belt around me. "It was really bad," Theo said, gesturing to my ribs. "It hurts really bad," I said, taking short breaths. 17 broken ribs, Keith, Theo said, shaking his head. "That's the last time I saw a Wendigo. At least I hope it is. I'm 27 now and I'm married to Theo. We still talk about the beast that caused breathing problems for me, but we never say its name for we fear it will come back." As a kid, I moved around quite a lot for my dad's work, never really staying very long in one place. When I was around 5 years old, my family, which at the time consisted of me, my parents, and my brother, who is 3 years younger than me, we'll call him Jacob, decided it was time to settle down in one place. We moved in 2005 to a new town. I still live in this town today and have for the past 20 years. This story is about a forested hollow near my house that I have spent most of my life exploring, and a few of the encounters I have had in and near this hollow. I started my first year of elementary school, made new friends, and finally started to have a normal childhood. A few years passed, and as we explored this new city we lived in, we discovered a very large park, only about a 5-10-minute drive from our house. My mom would take me and my brother all the time to go play on the massive playground castle they had or run around in the big fields next to the playground. Behind the playground castle lie a wooded hollow, thick tall trees lining the very edge of the grass fields and the fenced wood chip area where the playground is. The ground slopes abruptly down just slightly past where the trees start. As an adult now looking at maps and having walked this hollow, it spans about 5 miles long with the park on one side of the hollow and a road on the other side. This road is a long, straight road with the hollow on one side of it and houses lining the other side facing the trees. My parents were big into camping. All my childhood I can remember camping a few times each month. Being a 5-year-old and full of energy, as kids usually are, I loved it. Hiking, camping, and being outdoors was, and still is, such a freeing and relaxing experience for me. Without the distraction of phones and TV, we would visit the park too, 3 times a week, as well as hike in the nearby mountains and trails. Whenever we would visit the park, I would ask my mom if we could go hike down in the hollow and explore, to which my mom always replied no. She didn't want me going alone, and my brother was too young. She also was unable to accompany me being pregnant with my soon-to-be second younger brother. I always argued but never dared disobey her, as for fear of getting lost or hurt. Another year or so passed and my brother was born. I believe I was around 8 at the time. We decided to take a trip to the park, This time my dad was able to join us, which was a rare occasion since he usually worked during the day. I asked him if we could go hike down in the hollow, and he agreed to join me, leaving my mom to tend to my newborn brother. Me, my dad, and Jacob set out along the line of trees, hoping to find a break in them or perhaps a game trail. After a few minutes of searching, we found a spot near the end of the field where the ground didn't angle downwards as sharp as the other areas of forest, and the brush had been cleared enough to squeeze through. We headed down into the hollow, and as we reached the bottom of the hollow where the ground leveled out and took a look around, it was a mess, fallen trees everywhere, thick trees blocking anything beyond 10 to 20 feet in front of you. A river flowed through the hollow as well. But the bed had been so neglected that the water flowed freely wherever, flooding almost the entire hollow, creating a swamp of sorts and making it almost impenetrable. Seeing this, my dad decided we were very underprepared and that we should head back and explore more on a later day. We returned to the park the following week, and I was sure to wear my hiking boots and brought all my adventure gear. We started down the same trail we had discovered before, into the woods. We didn't make it very far past where we had the previous week. The river had completely submerged almost everything around. Winter was fast approaching, and we didn't make it back to the park too many more times that year. Every time I returned, I walked along the trees, looking into the hollow to see if I could see what was down there or any other means of approach, with no luck. The following spring, we returned to the park. Once again, I walked up and down the tree line looking for a new way in when I found a path I don't remember being there the year previous. I was 9 years old at the time, and my mom decided I was old enough to go explore on my own as long as I stayed within earshot. I bolted down the new path I had found, eager for adventure. I followed the trail, and it led me to what looked like a sewer pipe sticking out of the steep walls of the hollow. The pipe jutted out past the flooded area to what looked like a continuation of trail. I crossed the pipe, jumping down onto dry ground. I followed the trail further down, and eventually it led me to the river. Upstream from where it had been blocked and overflowed, I walked along the river and started noticing pieces of asphalt in the dirt. The pieces got larger and larger until I was walking on a road through the forest. The road was about the width of a normal lane, but had been completely forgotten. I imagine it was once some sort of an access road, but now large chunks were missing and it was very fragmented and overgrown. It was at this point I realized I had gotten carried away and wandered too far from the park. I quickly retraced my steps and found my way back up to where my mom was. Jacob was playing at the park with some kids he had met, and my mom was sitting quietly on the grass watching. Easton, my youngest brother, had been left at home with my dad for the evening. I asked my mom if her and Jacob would come down into the hollow with me so we could explore further, and she agreed. I called Jacob over, and we all headed down into the hollow on the new trail I had found. We crossed the pipe and were soon walking back down the paved road. We passed the point that I had reached and saw a small trail off to the right that looked to make a wide curve and meet back up with the neglected paved road further down. Jacob took off down the path before my mom could object, and sure enough, reappeared 15-20 yards down the road. He waited there for us, and we all started walking together again. As the road began to break apart, more and asphalt was getting further and further spaced again. The trail opened up into a huge empty space, a large circle of dirt in the middle of this hollow that the river ran through, but no trees were growing in this area until the ground starts to slope back upwards toward the road. I can hear the sound of cars now and look up to see a large freeway not too far ahead of us. As we got closer, I noticed there is no way to access this freeway. The ground rises almost straight up, making it impossible to climb to the freeway, located around 150 to 200 feet above our heads. I followed the river with my eyes and noticed a tunnel under the freeway for the river to flow. We walked up to the tunnel to investigate. The opening of the tunnel was about 10 feet by 10 feet, and went all the way to the other side of the 6-lane freeway. It was very dark, and you couldn't see much out the other end of the tunnel. We all took our shoes off and stepped into the shallow river to walk up this tunnel. We reached the other side and was turned around by the overgrown forest, which was only allowing water through. We put our shoes back on and followed the trail back to the park and headed home. The following year, I couldn't have cared less about the playground. My mom, now having been in the hollow, decided I was old enough to go down by myself as long as I didn't go through the tunnel and took Jacob with me. The hollow became our new playground. Every time we went back, it was straight to the hollow. All summer long, it was hammocks and tree forts and playing in the river and just all around good times. Oddly, I never saw another person down there. I never thought anything of it. I was just happy that this wooded kingdom belonged to only me and my brother. The following summer, Jacob decided he wanted to do his birthday party at the park. My parents agreed to the party idea, and them and Jacob started planning it. I was 11 and Jacob was turning 8 at this point in the story. We arrived at the park to get everything prepared, and all Jacob's friends arrived shortly after. Everyone had a great time playing in the castle playground, running in the fields, eating cake, and exchanging gifts. After the main festivities had ended, I suggested to the 10 or so kids there that we head down to the hollow so they could see the tunnel. My parents asked if one of them could come with us, but I objected. I thought it would be cool to be the older brother that led everyone down to this freeway tunnel me and Jacob had discovered. They agreed to let us go if we were very careful and came back fairly quickly. We had built bridges and new paths, so it was easier to bypass the excess water and overgrowth of the woods to make it to the tunnel. I took the point and lead everyone down into the hollow with Jacob close behind me. We walked fairly quietly down the trail, trying not to point out or draw attention to the forts and cool stuff me and Jacob had made. We reached the paved section of road that ran along the river, and Jacob decided it would be fun to take the wide, swooping trail that he had discovered that met up with the paved road farther down. I turned slightly and made for the trail, making sure everyone was still in line behind me. We reached a point of the trail where it started to curve back around, and I could see the paved road ahead of me as well as behind me. As we headed down this side trail back onto the overgrown access road, a woman appeared maybe 15 yards ahead of us, at the opening of the trail, stopping to block our path back onto the asphalt, and just stared at us. From where we were, she looked normal. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and was just watching us. I stopped suddenly, and Jacob asked from behind me, "What's wrong?" peeking around me to see the woman blocking us. I turned around and, feeling uneasy but unsure why, said, "Let's go back that way," ushering the group to head back the way we came and get back onto the paved trail. As we started walking back the way we came, the woman appeared again in front of us to block our other escape from this side trail. This is the first time that I can recall getting that feeling. It's a very uneasy, gut-churning, evil feeling that I have only experienced a handful of times in my life, like you just know something is wrong. Immediately, my stomach dropped. My legs felt weak and heavy. My hands got sweaty. I could feel a large lump in my throat like I was going to start crying. "What the?" Jacob said shakily, and we promptly turned back the way we originally intended, hoping to get back onto the main trail. We turned around and took several steps the other way when the woman moved again in a what seemed at the time an unnatural speed to block the other end of the trail. I could feel the tears start to form in my eyes, and I reached down to grab the largest stick I could find. As I did, I turned my head slightly to Jacob and could see in his face that he had the same bad feeling as I did. He was pale and his breath was shaky, and he had reached down to also pick up a large stick in hopes of defending ourselves. We just stood there, no one moving, just locking eyes with the woman standing in front of us for what seemed like forever. Suddenly I heard my dad's voice from down the paved trail calling out for me and Jacob. The woman quickly looked towards my dad's voice and then turned her back to us to run off down the trail. We all turned around and started running towards my dad's voice. As we re-emerged onto the main trail, I turned to see if I could see the woman down the trail, but there was no sign of her. The awful feeling faded the closer we got to my dad's voice, and he suddenly appeared around one of the corners. As we got closer, he appeared to be slightly upset. I ran up to him and told him about the woman down the trail. He said he hadn't seen anyone come down here, and that he was slightly disappointed that we had taken so long when my mom had asked us to be quick. I looked at him slightly confused and asked what he was talking about. He then said we had been down in the hollow for at least half an hour. I thought this was odd because the normal round-trip hike to the freeway tunnel was around 15 minutes and we hadn't even made it halfway. He started back towards the park and we all followed. I turned one last time to see if I could get a glimpse of that woman, but no luck. We made our way back to the park, and all the party kids' parents were there to pick them up, and were also slightly upset that we had been missing when they arrived. Me and my brother still talk about that experience till this day, and he has since confirmed the awful feeling he got when that woman appeared. I'm grateful we never found out what she wanted, and that my dad was there that day, otherwise I'm not sure what would have happened. Many years passed, and after that never went into that hollow without one of my parents. Around 5 years later, the city decided that something needed to be done with the hollow and started clearing paths along the river for a big recreational hiking area and mountain bike trail. The same year they started the construction, my family decided we needed a bigger house. Luckily, staying in the same city, we were able to find something within our price range. I looked up the address online and saw that it was 3 blocks away from that hollow I loved so much as a child. Throughout the construction and renovations, me and my friends would sneak down into the hollow when they weren't working to inspect the progress. They were rerouting the river and cleaning out the swamp area and removing all the dead and fallen trees in efforts to make it nice. Around 2016, I was in high school and the city was finishing up with the project. Completely forgetting my childhood experience, my friends wanted to go down in the dark and check it out. One Friday night, we headed over to the park and parked at one of the hollow access points. We got out our flashlights and headed down into the dark. We walked on the freshly renovated trail for about 10 minutes, admiring the new mulch they had put down in place of the shredded asphalt, the benches every 100 yards or so, and the signs and maps they had put up everywhere. It was quite nice, and I was excited to return with my brother to hopefully make some new memories. As we walked a little farther, my 2 friends in front of me stopped to look at something on the ground with their flashlights. We'll call them Boston and Justin. I went over to them to see what they were looking at. As I approached, I saw them gathered around an Ouija board sitting in the middle of the trail. I once again got that awful feeling like I had so many years before, memories suddenly flooding back, sending a chill down my spine. "Don't even fucking touch that. We're leaving," I said, and immediately turned to leave. My friends teased and poked fun at me, but they hadn't experienced what I had. At least they wouldn't experience anything for a few more years. We got back to the car, and I told them my story about the strange woman and stated I was not coming back here at night. They quietly agreed, and we left the parking lot. Over the next couple years, I did enjoy that hollow quite a bit, walking the dog and riding mountain bikes with Jacob. The next incident happened a couple years later in 2018. I was riding my motorcycle through town when my phone started ringing. Being on a bike, I didn't answer. I simply reached down and silenced my phone. A few minutes later, another phone call. I responded the same way and silenced the call. As I was riding, I received 2 more phone calls. I finally decided to stop at a gas station and see who this was. I pulled my phone out to see 4 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I returned the call to hear a shaky woman's voice on the other line. "Is this Ammon?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Who's this?" "This is Nate's mom," she responded. "Have you seen or heard from him lately?" Apparently, Nate didn't come home last night and she hadn't heard from him. Nate was one of me, Boston, and Justin's friend from school. We hung out with him occasionally and all had multiple classes together. I told her I hadn't, and she thanked me and asked if I would please reach out to her if I heard anything. I agreed, and she hung up. I decided to send Nate a text just to see if he was all right. "Hey bro, your mom just called me. She's wondering where you're at, just FYI," the text read. I hit send, got gas, and hopped back onto my bike. When I got home, still no text back from Nate. I didn't think much of it. We were teenagers. He probably just drank too much at a friend's house and is feeling it. The next day, Nate wasn't at school. I showed up to the class we had, and his desk sat empty the entire period. I texted Boston and Justin confirming that Nate's mom had also called them, and they hadn't seen him either. I texted Nate again. "Hey man, you good?" The day dragged on and no response to either text. I called him after school to see if maybe he wanted to hang out. No answer. I texted his mom to see if they heard anything. She said no. At this point, I was beginning to get a bit worried. He had been in fights with his parents before and stayed at friends' houses for a night, but never this long. And with no response to any of his friends, it did seem odd. The next day at school, Nate wasn't there. His desk sat empty again as we walked into class. He had now been missing 4 days. His mom let us know they had gotten the police involved, and I saw her around the school a couple times looking very panicked. She stopped us once in the hall looking to be on the verge of tears and begged us to please come forward if we knew anything. We swore we didn't, Boston and Justin shooting me nervous look as we explained we all had reached out to him multiple times. That night they found Nate. Still to this day I ask Nate about it. He doesn't remember. It's the same answer every time. He just doesn't know what happened. Every time I bring it up, you can see him get uneasy. He shifts his weight around and gets nervous and quiet. Nate went missing on a Tuesday and was found Friday night by a local in our town. Around 10 p.m. on Friday, someone said they saw Nate climb over the median on the side of the freeway at the top of that impossibly steep hill where the tunnel in the hollow was located. They said he flopped over the wall and just started walking down the side of the freeway. The woman that called the police said she pulled over to make sure he was okay, but as she approached, she reported he was covered in sweat and dirt from somehow climbing the hill out of the hollow. He had no idea where or who he was. He was completely naked and covered in blood, extremely dehydrated, and had been beaten close to death. The police and city had set up security cameras at the park and trail cams in the hollow in hopes of catching people who had been vandalizing the area and to keep an eye on the cars in the parking lot. I have seen this footage myself and can confirm it was Nate. He has a very distinct head of hair. You see Nate in the security camera on Thursday night come walking down the street from where we lived well after the sun had gone down. He makes his way through the parking lot and down one of the hollow access trails. The feed then switches to a night vision trail cam along the side of the hiking path, and sure enough, there's Nate walking down the trail. The switch to the next recorded camera feed of another trail cam about a mile or so down the trail. Nate never made it to this camera. Nate and his family said they've watched hours of that trail cam footage trying to get a glimpse of Nate or anyone further down the trail, and no one ever appears. It's puzzling. This camera is located between the first camera and the tunnel under the freeway. He would have had to walk past it in order to have climbed that hill to the freeway, but he never does. This still sits uneasy with me, and I know it does with Nate and my other friends, but this hollow is a mystery. So many odd things and people I've seen, I don't have an explanation for it. Not long after this incident happened, a woman was jogging on the trail. Not sure why she was there at this time, but this incident happened around 4 a.m., quite an early time for a jog. Now my town is pretty quiet at night. The occasional car here or there, but if you're driving around past 1 a.m., it's likely you're one of the only cars on the road. From the story I read on the news, this woman was jogging in the hollow and sprinted out of one of the trail accesses into the road and was hit and killed by what I imagine was one of the only cars out at the time. What would have caused that? An adult after a full workout jog would sprint out into the road at such an odd hour without ensuring the road was clear? Another mystery that I can't explain, but is still centered around this strange hollow. The most recent and scariest of my encounters happened about a year after the woman was killed. Me, Boston, and Justin were out late. It was graduation week and we had all ended the year with pretty good grades. Back then, I used to drive my friends around town in the back of my truck, and we would throw water balloons at unsuspecting cars. Looking back, not a good idea, but we had to find something to kill the boredom. As I said, it was late one weekend around 1:30 to 2 a.m., and we were driving around with a bucket of water balloons causing trouble. Like I stated earlier, there aren't many people out this late, but we hit the occasional car full of girls our age, and they would all scream, or kids we went to school with would chase us and try to fight. As it got later, I decided we should probably start heading back home. As we were driving, a car pulled up next to us. I looked over and saw two guys in the front seat. The man in the passenger seat gave me a bit of a dirty look from my friends sitting in the back of the truck. The turn to my house was coming up, and I looked one last time over at the man, who was still looking at me a bit salty, just to see Justin from the back of the truck wind up and launch a water balloon right at his closed window. The man driving slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching stop, and then merged over behind me in my lane to start following us. Making the decision to not lead these guys back to my house, I quickly took the next turn, which happened to be the road that lined the hollow opposite of the park. The car whipped onto the street behind us, and I thought they were going to rear-end me, they were so close. Now, during all the construction, the city had built an access trail for all the trucks and tractors to drive down into the hollow. It was a rocky dirt road that sloped gently down to the large open area at the end of the trail where the freeway tunnel was. I tore up the street, trying to loose the guys chasing us. As we approached the access road, I noticed that the gate had been left open, another odd detail. This gate was usually closed and locked with a padlock. I didn't hesitate, though, and steered my truck towards the gate. I mounted the curb and drove down the dirt road, not expecting the small car to follow us. I was correct, and they drove past as we descended into the hollow. I drove through the river and stopped in the large clearing near the tunnel. Spring hadn't gotten the memo yet, so it was a chilly night. Justin and Boston were wearing jackets, and I had the heat on in the truck. Down in the hollow near the river, it seemed even colder. There was a slight breeze, and you could see your breath. Planning on calling it a night, I rolled the window down and stopped the car. "Y'all want to get in?" I yelled. I heard two sets of boots hit the ground, and my friends climbed into the truck. I started driving towards the playground on the other end of the hollow, branches brushing the side of my truck as we barely squeezed down the narrow hiking path. "Why don't you go back up the way we came down?" Boston asked. "You want those guys to beat the shit out of us?" I asked, and got no response from either friend. We continued creeping slowly down the trail. I figured the trees were thick enough down here that no one would see us, so turned on a 60 roof-mounted light bar and a smaller light bar in my front bumper. The lights lit up the whole hollow like it was midday, flooding everything with bright white lights. We continued driving for another couple minutes or so. Justin and Boston were laughing at a continuing conversation they had in the bed of the truck while I was focused on the trail ahead of me. We reached the section of trail where we had found the Ouija board, and Justin and Boston started talking about that night we had shared. I had completely forgotten once again the memory of that night, and so many others came flooding back, and I reached over to lock the doors of the truck. Another few minutes of driving passed, all of us in the safety of the truck joking about if we saw something I'd just run it over. We scanned the trail ahead of us, looking off into the brush to see if we could spot something. We didn't see so much as a deer. We neared about the three-quarters point of the trail, still searching the woods for anything. All three of us eyes locked on the forest and the large pool of light the bars cast. I looked over at my door to double-check I had hit the master switch and locked all of them, but as I did, something caught my eye. I raised my gaze slightly to look out my window, and 5 or so feet from the truck stood a young girl. She looked to be about 5 years old, definitely too young to be down here at this hour, and like I had said, it was pretty cold down there, and around 2:30 a.m. when this happened. She was wearing an oversized zip-up jacket with the hood pulled over her head, shielding part of her face. And she just stood off in the brush, staring at the moving truck. I yelled loudly and mashed the gas pedal to the floor, suddenly having no regard for the condition of my truck and the woods around me. We soared down the trail and came flying up out of the hollow into the parking lot. My tires screeched on the asphalt as I whipped the car out of the parking lot and down the street. This entire time, I hadn't realized that Justin and Boston were talking to me. Justin grabbed my shoulder from the back seat. "Ammon, what the hell are you doing? Slow down." I looked down to see us going about 40 over the speed limit and pulled over into a nearby church parking lot. I turned to my friend and asked them if they saw it. "Saw what?" they asked. My heart was still beating in my throat and I was breathing very heavily. "Bro, are you okay? What the fuck happened?" Boston asked. After I calmed down for a few minutes, I told them about the small girl I had seen standing outside the truck. "No way, bro. We were watching out the windshield. We would have seen her." They tried to rationalize what I saw, but they gave up seeing my face drained of color and my legs and hands shaking as I tried to engage the clutch and shift my car. "Let's go, dude. I don't want to be around here," Boston said as he gave me a nervous look. "You think that's what got Nate?" Justin says as we drive away. A chill ran down my spine as I thought back to Nate walking around down there alone. What the hell had happened to him? I dropped my friends off and drove home. After that, I vowed never to go back into that hollow alone during the day, and definitely not at all at night. I didn't want to end up like Nate, or see whatever that woman had seen when she was hit by that car. 3 months passed, and we didn't talk about it much. Boston and Justin would bring it up from time to time, and we'd all sit around and guess who or what the hell that was. One afternoon, I was at work. I was just closing up the store I worked at when Boston called me. I answered and said hello. Boston sounded like he had been running. His breath was quick, and he was talking really fast. "Who else did you tell about the little girl in the hollow?" He asked. "No one." I responded, "Just you two." The phone went quiet for a minute. "Hello?" I asked as I checked my phone to make sure we were still connected. He then said something to me that still gives me chills even now writing this out. "Bro, we were all telling ghost stories at work while we cleaned up, just like spooky stuff that's happened to us, right? Now, I've never told the story of the girl because I didn't see it, but this new girl starts off her story talking about the hollow." The phone went quiet again for a second before he started talking again. "Bro, this girl tells me her and some friends went down to the hollow one night just as like a spooky hike. She said they were down there at like midnight once, and her and all her friends saw a small girl in an oversized hoodie running through the brush and along the sides of the trail." I didn't say anything. I froze right there at work, checking around to see if somehow this girl would appear. "Ammon?" Boston asked over the phone. "You good?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I responded. "You said you've never told anyone?" "No," he responded. "Her story was completely unprovoked by anything related to us or anything I've said." We talked a little more about the girl's story and I hung up. This was the most recent event, and I refused to return to the hollow without a firearm. I've tried to research this hollow and playground with no luck. As stated, I still live near the hollow and drive past it every night on my way home from work. Scanning the trees to see if I can see that little girl watching me, wondering what goes on down there in the dark when no one's around. And what could happen to some unfortunate soul like Nate if he hadn't escaped that fateful night. This is my only experience, and it happened my freshman year in high school, 1983. The story includes my friends J and S, their initials to protect their real names. It was Halloween night, and I'm with my friends just finishing our freshman football practice. We were all 13 or 14 at the time, and the typical North NJ suburban kids. It was the Halloween age where we were a little too old to dress up and trick or treat, but still wanted the free candy. So we went up some houses with our football jerseys on for candy. A little background on me. Jay and SJ lived with little adult supervision, had the long hair, girls loved him, and acted like he didn't care about anything. S and I were from more typical suburban homes with rules and homework, not that I did very well in school. Jay seemed much cooler than us with his leather jacket, and that he was allowed to smoke in his house. He was, I guess, our leader. We had all started getting into heavy metal around this time. Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Ozzy and Dio, and ate up the satanic references and thought that made us hardcore. We even would spin Led Zeppelin albums backwards looking for satanic messages. 80s kids will understand this. Jay even made a metal cross in shop class and sometimes would wear it upside down and call himself Johnny Blade after a Black Sabbath song. That night, after getting candy, we ended up at S's house, in his parents' room for some reason, and I only say this because it was the only and last time I was ever in this room. The room was on the entry level of the house, off the living room of the Cape-style home. We were going through our candy when the radio on the nightstand just turned on. We all laughed it off and went on with our business when all of a sudden the lights started flickering. Jay, in reading this as signs, and it being Halloween, decided to bless the items with his crude shop class cross. Now S and I are on the bed, and Jay goes over to the clock with the cross upside down. I bless you in the name of thee, you know. I don't even want to say his name 40 years later. Over to the light. Same thing. Then he notices a crucifix over the bedroom door and heads that way. He raises the cross, and as the words start coming out of his mouth, he is lifted off the ground 3 feet and hurled onto the bed 5 feet away onto me and S. I'm so sacred I run out into the hall. The lights and radio are going crazy, and then I notice it looks like Jay is swallowing his tongue. S is on top of him immediately with his fingers in his mouth, trying to prevent him from swallowing his tunge, and Jay is gagging. I'm petrified and inch my way back into the room. Jeff's eye are now rolling over. The lights and radio are going crazy, and then it all stops. A minute after S is trying to get Jay to explain what F just happened, and I'm nervously going in and out of the room. We then all run out of the house onto the front lawn, close to the bedroom window. Jay couldn't talk, couldn't say anything, completely mute. From the lawn, we can still see the lights going crazy again and hear the radio through the window. S is freaking out as this is his parents' room, and he's probably worried about getting in trouble. After about 10 minutes, everything seemed to settle down. Jay was shaking up and still mute. I think he was in shock. We were all scared out of our minds. S ended up having to call Jay's mom to come pick him up. I always remember how frightened Jay looked in the car. He couldn't even make eye contact with us. That night I remember crying in bed because I was so scared trying to fall asleep. Every sound was terrifying. I waited for Jay outside school the next morning and could tell he didn't want to talk about it. So being the funny guy in our crowd, I asked him if he could light our football coach's car on fire or perform some other deed. He laughed, and that made me feel good. And him also. Jay was thrown off the team a couple of weeks later for something I don't remember. And we drifted as kids do. S and I ended up remaining friendly, but ended up in different crowds by the end of high school. So we never had a full debrief of that night, just the three of us. S and I did tell some people the story, but most just thought it was unbelievable, and since Jay pretended to be the Johnny Blade character, it sounded contrived. So I stopped telling people, except my wife and a few others over the years. Nothing paranormal has happened to me since that I know of. I'm not sure this is even paranormal, maybe more of a spiritual experience. This was years ago now, but I remember it. I remember all of it. I loved the forest and I loved hunting, but not anymore. That night the moon was full, but the trees choked its light. Streams of silver fought for every inch, peeking through the canopy. Footfalls in the forest echoed, the crunch of leaves and the snapping of twigs announcing my presence. I wasn't lost, but I hadn't found what I'm looking for. Earlier that day I shot a deer. It felt wrong, that's the best way to explain it. Just wrong. I had no luck, sitting in my stand for hours. Then it walked out of the tree line, a huge buck. It strolled right to the center of the clearing, its head pivoting side to side and then up. It was looking straight at me. I took aim, lining up my crosshairs on the deer. A voice in the back of my head whispered, "Don't do it." Why? I thought. "Just don't take the shot," the voice insisted. I lined up my crosshairs again. The deer, unblinking, glassy black eyes staring up at me. Why isn't it running? My chest started to tighten. "I don't know, but don't do it," the voice persisted. I curled my finger around the trigger and began to squeeze. "No! Don't shoot that deer!" the voice screamed in my head. I knew I shouldn't have pulled that trigger, but I did. God, what I'm saying doesn't even make sense. But it's what I saw. It's what I did. I shot that deer and it didn't budge. It took that bullet between the shoulder blades like a mosquito bite. It flicked its ear, licked its nose, turned its head, and walked back to the gap between the trees, vanishing. I climbed down from the tree stand and approached the spot where I'd shot the deer. There was blood, but it wasn't right. The wound I'd made in the deer's chest was mere moments ago, yet the blood on the ground was already clotted and dried. I followed the blood trail into the trees. The smell, God, the smell was horrible, like the stench of swamp mud and rot. Something was off, but I had to track it. My dad instilled in me strong hunting ethics. Know your gun, shoot only when certain, and always track down wounded game. I can't explain why I felt the way I did. Watching it walk back into the woods made my stomach drop. But why? It wasn't a deer. It saw you. It took that bullet like a slap on the back. Then what was it? I don't know, but it wasn't a deer. The forest around me was alive with the sounds of summer, the chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, frogs joining the chorus on cue. Everything was in motion. I followed the blood trail, refusing to give up for the night. I had to find it. Suddenly the blood trail stopped at the base of a large tree. The blood had been heavy and constant up to this point. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but there was nothing. Where could it have gone? Then something thick and sticky struck my forehead. I reached up, touched it, and brought my fingers into the light. Red. Blood. I shone my light up the tree, and there it was. Halfway up the trunk, blood. Further up on one of the branches, more blood. What the heck? That's not possible. I tried to rationalize. Had the deer succumbed to its injuries and been dragged up the tree by something? No, there wasn't enough blood for that, and there were no remains. How did blood get up in the tree? It must be from another wounded animal, not the one I'm tracking. Perhaps I got swapped onto its trail instead. No, it can't be. I know I've been tracking the same trail the whole time. The only explanation is that the deer, that thing I shot, scaled this tree. Deer don't climb. So where is it now? I shone my light into the treetops, but there was nothing. The branches were bare, no sign of life anywhere. Well, crap. Now what? I decided to make camp since the trail was dead and there was nothing left to track. I set up my tent and gathered some wood for a fire beneath the tree. I tried to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying the events from earlier over and over again. The more I thought about it, the less anything made sense. And the less sense things made, the more threatened I felt. I sat up, stoked the fire, and grabbed my weapon. I was ready to fight. Maybe not to win, but to fight. "What are you doing?" a voice in my head asked. "I just want to be ready," I replied. "Ready for what?" the voice persisted. "I'm not sure, but it makes me feel better." "No, you know." "Know what?" "You shouldn't have shot that deer." Sitting by my fire, I remained at the ready, constantly scanning the area and listening to every sound the forest threw at me. The night was loud, the forest was alive with creatures, all caught in a perpetual state of hunting or hiding. Then, faintly, I heard a snapping sound. I turned and raised my gun toward the void. The orange glow of the fire danced on the barrel, illuminating the campsite but revealing nothing beyond. I decided not to use my flashlight. I wanted complete control of my weapon. Motionless, I sat, listening intently. Nothing. Just the crackling of the fire. Yeah, that's all it was, I told myself. Nothing there. I knew that wasn't true, but it was the only thing I could say to convince myself to lower the gun. The night dragged on, but I survived, despite the occasional kamikaze moth pelting me. As dawn broke, the cool morning air, tinged with a light blue hue, enveloped the forest. It was a welcome change from the heat that lay ahead. A thick fog had rolled in. I extinguished the remnants of the fire, packed my gear, and prepared to head to the pickup location. My friend wouldn't be able to get me for another day, but at least I'd be ready. I squatted down to retrieve my packed bag, slinging it over my shoulders in one swift motion. The swirling fog parted where the bag had lain, revealing something I hadn't noticed before. Tracks. Not just any tracks. Deer tracks. Hundreds of them. The hoofprints struck deep into the damp ground around the campsite, forming a perfect circle around my camp. This thing had circled me all night long, just beyond the light of the fire. But that couldn't be. I would have heard something. I mean, there were hundreds of tracks. It would have had to make noise at some point. Upon further inspection of the formation, it became apparent there were no tracks showing entry or exit from the area. It was like the deer had materialized right beside the campsite and then vanished. Forget this. I am out of here, I muttered to myself as I began the long trek to the pickup location. However, I decided not to stop there. I'd hike down the logging road to the mouth of the main dirt road that my buddy would have to drive down to get to the meetup spot. Honestly, it didn't do much in getting me out of here any sooner, but it was good to have a mission to work towards. Any amount of time shaved off in these woods was better. Most of the hike was uneventful. I was approaching well over halfway to the meeting spot when I decided it was time for a break. I rummaged around in my bag for water and a protein bar. I was making great time. At this rate, a few more hours of hiking, and I would be on the logging road in no time, and only a half-hour hike from the main dirt road. Snap! A branch popped behind me. Lifting my gun and swinging around to the noise in one fluid motion, I scanned the area behind me. The forest is thick this time of year, so my view of my surroundings is limited. This thing could be mere feet away and I wouldn't see it. The iron sights of my rifle glided across the forest, and then I stopped. I saw something, a big patch of brush, but something was off with it. At the top of a large bush, there were weird branches coming out, oddly bare. No, not branches, antlers. My hands tightened around my weapon as I pulled its buttstock tight against my shoulder. Tunnel vision kicked in. I saw nothing aside from the bush. Then I guessed where the head would be relative to the exposed antlers. I took aim and squeezed the trigger. The kick of the gun jolted my insides. A loud, thunderous bang ripped through the forest, followed by the burnt smell of gunpowder. It didn't even flinch. No movement at all from this thing. The tips of its antlers were still visible. Then the exposed point slowly lowered down and out of sight into the brush. Everything was still. Everything was quiet. Everything was wrong. I grabbed my bag and began to run, as fast as the forest would let me, towards the direction of the logging road, tearing through the woods between the snapping and whipping of vines and branches. I could swear I heard something tailing me. But I didn't care. I just wanted out. So I kept running. I burst through the thicket and into open air, the resistance of the forest vanishing and toppling me forward onto the dusty red earth. An orange cloud surrounded me as I slid across the dirt road. I rolled over, facing where I had exited the tree line, chest heaving, waiting for that thing to rip through the foliage and jump on me. But as I sat on the road, gun up, nothing came out of the woods. It was still. I think I'm losing my freaking mind. I lifted myself up from the dirt, brushed off my clothing, and gathered my bearings. It's this way. I started down the dirt path, hiking for a few minutes before a section of cleared forest came into view on the right side of the path. It was an old logging site. Stumps jutted up like headstones in a tree graveyard. The clearing was littered with the tracks of trucks and the branches of past harvests, a wide-open expanse of mangled wood and debris. This is as far as I go for now. The sun will be going down in a few hours, and there's no point in going further. Plus, this will make a great spot for camp. The best part about it is plenty of firewood, an open view of my surroundings, and the ground is completely littered with branches, so I'll hear it coming. No trees mean no cover for it from my shots. Yeah, this is as good as it gets. One last night, and then my buddy should be here first thing in the morning to get me. Just one more night. For the last time, I set up camp, stacked a quick pile of firewood, and stood guard as the sun dipped below the horizon. The night crept in from the forest around me. I could sense I wasn't alone. The feeling had been lingering before dusk, but now it was closer, more persistent. The hours passed slowly. The wind was relentless, constantly threatening to snuff out my flames. I kept shifting my position to shield the fire with my body, but it was barely enough to keep it lit. The darkness was thicker than the night before, with no moon or stars, only clouds blanketing the sky and its light. It was quieter tonight. There were no sounds of bugs or animals, just the rustling trees and howling wind. Time dragged on with nothing happening. Dawn was just a couple of hours away. I made it, I thought. Maybe I am losing my mind. Then I saw it, a silhouette approaching my camp. The fire cast a faint glow, but I couldn't make out any details. It looked like my buddy. Maybe he's ahead of schedule and was drawn by the light of my fire. I stood up to greet him, but froze mid-stride as the figure moved closer, the darkness around it melting away. It wasn't my buddy. It wasn't even a man. The legs were too skinny, the arms hung at odd angles, and what looked like long hair rose from its shoulders in writhing lines above its head. As it stepped into the light, I saw it clearly, every horrifying detail. It was that deer, but not a deer, not at all. This thing continued walking straight toward me. It moved on its hind legs like a man. The forearms, now drooping in front of its body, ended in claws instead of hooves. Its jaw hung loosely on its hinge, revealing rows upon rows of jagged, malformed teeth. Its antlers now more resembled tentacles, whipping the air around it, and its eyes, no longer on the sides of its head, had shifted to the center of its face, one atop the other. I raised my gun, took aim, and then something from the sky hit my hand, then my cheek. It ran down my face and off my chin. It had started to rain. The sky opened up, unleashing a downpour that extinguished my fire in seconds, plunging me into darkness. The last sight I had of this thing was it advancing on me. I fired my gun into the dark. The flash from the discharge revealed nothing of its location, but I saw my flashlight on the ground to my left. I could hear nothing over the ringing in my ears from the shot. Even the beating of the rain was lost to me. Keeping my gun raised, I bent down with one arm outstretched, feeling around the ground for the flashlight until I touched the familiar smoothness of plastic against the rough earth. I grabbed it, and as I did, I felt fur brush against my outstretched arm. I swung the gun in that direction and pulled the trigger. The recoil threw the gun from my hand, and I felt something warm and sticky splatter across my face. Clutching the flashlight, I dug my feet into the ground and pushed off into a sprint. I clicked on the light and picked a direction, the rain beating against my face, washing sweat into my eyes, making them sting. Each falling droplet obscured more of my light, leaving me barely enough visibility to keep my footing. I ran and ran until I hit even ground, the light illuminating the muddy path of the dirt road. I continued down the path until I lost my footing, sliding in the mud. The flashlight bounced ahead of me, landing with its beam pointed back in the direction I had come from. I rolled over onto my back and saw a tall, shadowy figure running up the path toward me. Scrambling to my feet, I left the light where it lay and let my instincts guide me. I didn't stop running until my footsteps slapped against pavement. I had made it all the way to the main highway. The sun was beginning to rise over the trees. I walked along the side of the road until I heard a familiar voice call out behind me. "Hey!" I stopped and turned to see my buddy half hanging out the window of his truck, a look of concern and confusion on his face. "What the heck happened to you?" he asked, hopping out of the driver's side door. I paused and just stared at him, unsure of how to explain. How could anyone understand? I finally said the only thing that made any sense. "I shot a deer."